It's October 331 BC. Alexander spots a gap in the Persian line. He charges. This is how a 20-year-old conquered the known world, and what it cost him. But to understand how Alexander ended up on that battlefield, we need to start with a murder. He inherited a kingdom surrounded by enemies, a treasury deep in debt, and an army that wasn't sure it wanted him. Every Greek city wanted him dead. Northern tribes smelled weakness. The largest empire on earth was watching from the east. What he did in the next 12 years would reshape civilization, and it started before he could even grow a beard. In 359 BC, Macedonia was a fractured kingdom on the northern edge of Greece, dismissed by Athens and Thebes as semi-barbarian. Philip II changed everything. In 2 decades, he turned this backwater into the most powerful military force in the Greek world. His weapon was the sarissa, an 18-foot pike so long that 5 rows of spear tips projected beyond the front rank. A wall of iron no cavalry could breach. By 338 BC, Philip had crushed Athens and Thebes at the Battle of Chaeronea. His 18-year-old son led the decisive blow. Alexander personally shattered the Sacred Band of Thebes, an elite corps of paired warriors, never before defeated. He was 18. But Alexander wasn't only a fighter. From age 13, Aristotle himself had been his personal tutor. Aristotle prepared an annotated copy of Homer's Iliad for him. Alexander kept it under his pillow every night, right next to a dagger. He was obsessed with Achilles, the hero who chose a short, glorious life over a long, forgettable one. That choice would define everything. Summer, 336 BC. Philip staged a grand celebration at the theater of Aegae, his daughter's wedding. It was meant to be his greatest triumph. Philip entered in white robes, walking ahead of his bodyguards to receive the crowd's adoration. He never reached his seat. A bodyguard named Pausanias drove a Celtic sword through the king's ribs. Philip died almost instantly. Pausanias ran for waiting horses, but was killed before anyone could ask who had sent him. Alexander was 20 years old, and every fault line in his father's empire was about to crack wide open. Athens celebrated Philip's death. Thebes expelled its Macedonian garrison. Northern tribes broke their treaties. 2 rival claimants challenged the throne. His advisors counseled caution. Alexander did neither. Within weeks, both rival claimants were dead. When the Thessalians blocked his army at Tempe Pass, Alexander didn't attack the position. He ordered his engineers to carve steps into the cliff face of Mount Ossa. The Thessalians found a Macedonian army behind them. They surrendered without a fight. But the real test came in 335 BC. While Alexander fought in the north, a rumor swept Greece. Alexander was dead. Thebes rose in full rebellion, killing Macedonian soldiers in the streets. Alexander was not dead. He marched 300 miles in 14 days. So fast, the Thebans refused to believe it was him. He offered terms. Thebes refused. The city was leveled. 6,000 killed, 30,000 sold into slavery. Only the temples and the house of the poet Pindar were left standing. The man who leveled cities also memorized verse. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles east, another new king sat on the throne of the largest empire the world had ever seen. Darius III had taken the Persian throne the same year as Alexander, after poisoning the eunuch who'd murdered his predecessors. He had no idea what was coming. Spring, 334 BC. Alexander marched 37,000 men to the Hellespont, the narrow strait between Europe and Asia. He had enough silver for 30 days of pay. He was the first man ashore. He hurled a spear into Asian soil, claiming the continent as territory won by the spear. At Troy, he anointed the tomb of Achilles with oil and ran a foot race naked around it with Hephaestion. Then he took a shield from the temple, said to date from the Trojan War itself, and carried it into every battle that followed. This wasn't tourism. It was a declaration of destiny. The Persians were waiting at the Granicus River. 20,000 cavalry massed along the steep far bank. The position was formidable. Parmenion, his most experienced general, urged him to wait until dawn. The ground was terrible. The hour was late. The advice was sound. Alexander refused. He said he would be ashamed to be stopped by a trickle of water after crossing the Hellespont. He led the companion cavalry into the river in a wedge formation, his white plumes marking him for every Persian on the far bank. The crossing was brutal, men and horses dying in the water, but the Macedonians clawed their way up the far bank. The Persians came straight for Alexander. A noble named Rusaces struck his helmet, shearing off one plume, denting the metal to his skull. Alexander killed him, but behind him, Spithridates was already raising a sword over his exposed head. A blade flashed from the side. Clitus the Black severed Spithridates' sword arm at the shoulder. Alexander lived. Remember that name, Clitus the Black, the man who saved Alexander's life. 7 years later, Alexander killed Clitus with his own hands, at a dinner party over a drunken argument. The Granicus was a total victory. Alexander sent 300 sets of captured Persian armor to Athens with a deliberate inscription: Alexander, son of Philip, and the Greeks, except the Lacedaemonians, from the barbarians of Asia. Sparta wasn't invited to share the glory. Western Anatolia fell like dominoes. Sardis surrendered. Ephesus surrendered. Alexander freed the Greek cities and replaced Persian tyrants with democracies. But the most dangerous enemy wasn't on land. The Persian commander Memnon of Rhodes was waging a naval war that could strangle Alexander's supply lines. Then Memnon died of illness. The greatest strategic threat to Alexander's campaign was removed by a fever, not a sword. November 333 BC. Alexander and Darius met face-to-face for the first time at the Battle of Issus, in a narrow coastal pass that choked the Persian advantage in numbers. Alexander charged straight for the Persian king, and Darius did something that would haunt him forever. He ran. He left behind his mother, his wife, his children, and his royal treasury. Alexander treated them with courtesy, a conqueror who knew the value of mercy. Darius offered half his empire for peace. Parmenion said he'd accept if he were Alexander. Alexander's reply became legend. So would I, if I were Parmenion. But instead of chasing Darius east, Alexander turned south. Persia's navy still controlled the sea. He needed to destroy it, not on water, but by taking every port. Every city surrendered. Except one. No conqueror had ever taken it. Nebuchadnezzar besieged Tyre for 13 years and failed to breach the island. Alexander asked only to sacrifice at their temple. The Tyrians saw through him. They killed his ambassadors and threw the bodies from the walls into the sea. Alexander announced he would build a road across the open sea to the island. His engineers thought he was mad. He meant every word. The causeway was 200 feet wide, built stone by stone into open water. The Tyrians hit back with a fire ship, a transport packed with pitch, oil, and sulfur, towed toward the causeway and set ablaze. Both siege towers burned to nothing. Alexander didn't stop. He widened the causeway, assembled a fleet of over 200 ships, and blockaded the island entirely. What followed was a 7-month arms race. The Tyrians poured heated sand from the walls. It slipped inside armor, under breastplates, into boots, burning soldiers alive from the inside. After 7 months, battering rams mounted on ships found weak stone in the southern wall. The wall cracked. Then it broke. Alexander was among the first men through. 8,000 Tyrians died. 30,000 were sold into slavery. The city that had defied every conqueror in history was finished. Then Alexander walked into the ruined temple and performed the sacrifice he'd asked permission for 7 months ago. The causeway was never removed. Over the centuries, silt and sand accumulated around it. Today, the island of Tyre is a peninsula. After Tyre, Egypt surrendered without a fight. Alexander founded the city of Alexandria, tracing its outlines in grain when the chalk ran out. Then he marched 500 kilometers into the Libyan desert to consult an oracle. The priest greeted him as the son of a god. Alexander never revealed what the oracle told him, but from this moment, he began to believe he was more than mortal. While Alexander spent 7 months at Tyre and months more in Egypt, Darius had been preparing, and he had learned from his mistakes. He chose a wide, open plain. He leveled the ground for his scythed chariots. He assembled the largest army Alexander would ever face. Alexander had 47,000 men. Darius had over 200,000. And from this moment, there was no going back. Parmenion urged a night attack. Alexander refused. "I will not steal my victory." And then he did something extraordinary. He went to sleep. His generals spent the night in agony. At dawn, they had to shake him awake. October 1st, 331 BC. The two armies faced each other across the leveled plain. 200 scythed chariots. Cavalry passed both flanks. This was Darius's killing ground. Alexander began his march. Not forward, at an angle, drifting to the right. He was dragging the Persians off their prepared ground. Darius had to follow or lose the flank. The scythed chariots charged. Macedonian javelin throwers targeted the horses. The chariots were a disaster. The Persian left stretched thinner, and thinner, and then a gap. A crack in the armor of the largest army on earth. Alexander turned the companions into a wedge and charged. The formation drove into the Persian center like a spear through cloth. His white plumes, his ancient shield from Troy, bearing straight for the great king. Darius broke. He climbed from his chariot and ran. Twice now, the king of Persia had abandoned his army. The empire was dying. But on the far side of the battlefield, Parmenion was being destroyed. Persian cavalry had broken through and was raiding the camp. Darius's mother was there. She refused to leave. Alexander was chasing Darius. Victory was in his hands. But Parmenion's message reached him. He turned back. The fighting to save the left wing was brutal, melee so close that men grappled with their hands. He saved the left wing, but Darius had escaped into the night. The field was silent now. Within months, Alexander entered Persepolis. The treasures required 10,000 mule carts and 5,000 camels to carry away. Then he burned it. The palace of Xerxes, consumed in a single night. Its fire-blackened ruins still stand in Iran. Darius never got his third chance. In the summer of 330 BC, his own general stabbed him in the desert. Alexander found him in a wagon. He covered the body with his own cloak. But Alexander didn't stop. He marched into Afghanistan, Central Asia, the mountains beyond the edge of every map, conquering, founding cities, losing himself. And the darkness came. Remember Clytus, the man who saved his life at the Granicus? Alexander killed him at a banquet with a spear. He crossed the Hindu Kush, descended into India, and fought King Porus and his 200 war elephants in a thunderstorm. When Alexander asked the defeated Porus how he wished to be treated, Porus answered, "As a king." Alexander gave him back his kingdom. By the time the army reached the Granicus River, they had been marching for 8 years. 17,000 miles. Their equipment was gone. Their youth was gone. Many hadn't seen home since they were teenagers. Alexander ordered another crossing. The army refused to move. Conus, one of his most loyal generals, a man who had fought at the Granicus, at Issus, at Gaugamela, stepped forward and described the dead, the wounded, the children growing up without fathers. He wasn't a mutineer. He was the army's voice. Alexander was furious. He withdrew to his tent for 3 days. He was waiting for the army to change its mind. The army did not change its mind. On the 3rd day, he emerged. He announced the sacrificial omens were unfavorable. The gods, not the men, had spoken. Alexander wept. The man who had conquered every army in the known world was stopped by the men who loved him. He ordered 12 enormous altars built at the river's edge, one for each Olympian god. Monuments at the farthest point of Greek civilization. Conus, the man who gave the speech that saved the army, died of illness days later. Alexander gave him a royal funeral. The army turned west. The return march through the Gedrosian desert killed more men than some of his battles. In India, before the turn back, an arrow had punched through Alexander's lung. He had nearly died inside an enemy fort, alone. Then Hephaestion died, the companion from his boyhood, the man he'd honored at Patroclus's tomb at the very start of everything. Alexander ordered the manes cut from every horse and mule in the army. He demolished city walls so the city itself would mourn. June, 323 BC, Babylon. Alexander fell ill after a banquet. The fever lasted 10 days. When his soldiers feared he was dead, they demanded to see him. He was carried out on his bed. As each man passed, he lifted his eyes, just his eyes, to meet theirs. He was 32 years old. His empire shattered the moment he died. His generals fought each other for 40 years over the pieces. But territory is what every empire loses. What Alexander built was something harder to destroy. He cracked the ancient world open and mixed its contents. Greek language and philosophy spread from Egypt to Central Asia, so dominant that the New Testament was written in it 3 centuries later. He did all of it between the ages of 20 and 32. He conquered the known world in his 20s. His body was taken to the city he'd traced in grain. Julius Caesar visited the tomb centuries later and wept. He realized that at Alexander's age, he had done nothing. It's October 331 BC. Alexander spots a gap in the Persian line. He charges. He chose the short, glorious life, just like Achilles, just like he always said he would. The Iliad was still under his pillow when he died.